listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Today's Mama podcast, where we talk all about how we care for the things we care about the most. In episode 4 with Meg Meeker, we talked about kids and anxiety and how kids don't live in quiet worlds anymore. This episode offers some lessons in slowing down and taking a day off every week. Our guest, Rabbi Susan Silverman, also offers some insights on adoption, especially international adoption. And then there's that one time she and her daughter got arrested. It's a good one. Enjoy this week's show.
All right, today we are talking to Susan Silverman, a rabbi, an activist, an author, a mom to 5. She's also the founder of Second Nurture, which is an organization and a community that is focused on finding permanent, loving families for all children, and she does a lot of amazing work there. But before we get there, I have to talk about how I originally found Susan, because she's got a famous sister named Sarah Silverman. And I was watching one of her online video episodes of, now Susan, correct me, it's called I Love America, isn't it? Or I Love You, America.
I Love You, America. Mm-hmm.
So I had stumbled onto an episode, and there was Susan and her sister Sarah cuddling atop a bed, you know, like tickling each other's backs and arms and having their conversation. And I laughed because I was like thinking to myself, the last place you would find my sister and I is giving each other a back rub on a bed, just, you know, chatting, because it wasn't the vibe of our family that we grew up with. We like each other, we love each other, but it's just, I was the kid that got to junior high and all the girls were hugging each other, and I was like, oh, what's happening? So tell me about your family and what that was like at your house. I think you guys were big cuddlers.
We were big cuddlers. You know, my mom's bed was like the place where everybody hung out. And even my stepmom at my mom's house, we just all were together and cuddling and rubbing each other's feet and laughing, just really laughing, often at the expense of our two beloved fathers, our father and our stepfather, you know, not welcome on the bed of the Silverman girls.
Oh, that's awesome. It sounds like, you know, you had a blended family. There were a lot of people on that bed, and that's a hard place for a lot of families to get to. What was it that made it so that your stepmom was on that bed and your stepdad was hanging out at the house, and that you guys were having such a positive relationship all together like that?
Early on after the divorce, it took time. It took a while. And I think, you know, the parents sort of came around to realizing that, first of all, they really cared about each other. And second of all, they married people who were so open-hearted and loving. And it just sort of, at a certain point, merged together, mostly when I started having kids, and nobody wanted to divide us and divide the time. There was no reason for us not to, you know, for the most part, be together. And so it just sort of evolved. Like our mom's bed was always the place of hangout, and it just kind of like expanded to include everybody.
I love that. And I think the big part is it takes time. I've got friends who are in the early stages of a separation or a divorce, and it just takes time. You don't get there automatically.
No.
Now, are your kids cuddly? Are your kids huggers also?
4 of the 5 kids are super cuddly. And one of our sons is not. And it's sort of like this ongoing joke in our family of trying to get a hug from Zamir.
Yeah.
And he'll hang out, but he's just like, his personality isn't so much cuddly. So, you know, it's a thing, but he's just kind of finds his own place in the big mush.
Well, and I've come across a couple of headlines lately, actually, that like as a society, we are having like a touch deficit. We're afraid to touch each other. And that's outside of our families. We're not hugging as much. We're not just touching each other appropriately as much. And it's filtering down into families a little bit, where maybe families aren't hugging each other quite so much. So this is me. I have decided that I will be the first to hug my kids, the last to let go. I had read that kids need like 8 hugs a day. Actually, let me back that up because I found the actual quote. So this is from a real psychotherapist, Virginia Satir. And she said, we need 4 hugs a day for survival. We need 8 hugs a day for maintenance. and we need 12 hugs a day for growth. And those aren't just all hugs from your mom. That's hugs from all those people in your world touching you and making you feel, loved and important. So yeah, as a mom, I find myself saying, I'll never let go.
Yeah.
And they're sick of it, but I'll keep doing it.
Like Zamir, I'm like, Zamir, can I just get a hug, sweetie? And he'll be like, why?
Just hard eye roll. Why? You're like, I need it.
And in our family, by the way, like my husband's not super huggy and kissy with the kids. It's not his personality either. Yeah. Like he'll kind of reach over and give them a kiss on the head or something, or a pat.
A pat. A loving pat. Which is still touch. It still counts. And it's still great for kids, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he adores them to the ends of the universe. But like, I'm just like all over them.
I love that. There was a point where when my son went into junior high, he got a little awkward about like, am I going to hug you? Am I not? And so I was just like, no, we're not doing that. You will always hug me. So it's almost like you just have to love them through that rejection. Keep hugging through the rejection and they get over it. Ish.
Yeah, those years are so hard. But you know what? In our, like in Jewish tradition, we have this thing called the Sabbath, right? Friday night to Saturday night. It's Friday evening to Saturday evening, sundown to sundown. And part of the ritual of Friday nights, in addition to the blessings over the wine and the challah and things like that, are also to bless the kids. And so our family, our kids have never known not being blessed, right? So every Friday night, we put our hands on their heads and we're practically nose to nose and we give them this blessing. So this is a time where throughout all my kids' like teenage crap, we always had that moment on Friday nights where we took a breath and looked into each other's eyes and they took a blessing from me. And in our family also the kids put their hands back on our heads and they'll often either repeat the blessing or just kind of hold their hands on our heads when we're blessing them. So even when things were really hard as teenagers, and things were really hard with especially my big girls as teenagers, we always would have that touchstone moment. And that, like, it saved my soul.
That is so beautiful. And I have to tell you, I studied abroad in Israel in college for about 5 months. And one of my favorite experiences revolved around being invited into a Jewish family's home for Sabbath or Shabbat and watching and participating in that meal and watching the woman or the mother of the house call in the Sabbath. I felt like a lot about that day was honoring her as well, the woman in the house. Talk to me about that. Is that your perception or how it goes at your house?
It's not how it goes at my house. Listen, there's this prayer called Eshet Chayil, and it talks about all the things that the wife has done throughout the week. And I feel like it's a total freaking setup. Like my husband wanted to sing it when we first got married. And I was like, no, because it basically says, oh, thank you so much for earning all the money and taking care of the house and keeping things clean and giving to the, and like doing all the things. I'm like, screw you. Like we're an egalitarian relationship. I don't want you to like thank me into.
I'm not doing all the things.
No, I'm not doing all the things. Exactly. And I feel like it's like a setup for Jewish women to like have to be 100% of everything in the household all the time. And it's just not a feminist point of view as I see it.
I love that angle too. And in our relationships, I do think we have to come to the table for exactly who we want to be, what roles we want to take on. And I'm with you. You know, both my husband and I work and have things we do, and we are very much in a partnership in our house. And I think we had to do that in the beginning. But my sister-in-laws often ask me, oh my gosh, how do you get him to do so much stuff? Why is he so different? I'm like, I don't get him to do anything. We're in this together and we operate like that, you know?
Right. It's like when the dad's home and the mom's out and people say, oh, is he babysitting? I'm like, he's not babysitting. He's the father.
He's a father with children. Well, tell me more about Shabbat at your house. It seems like you've got a lot of guests that show up.
We do. And Rachel, I expect you to be one of them very soon.
And I am so in.
Good.
I will book my plane ticket now.
Good. Bring the kids. Bring everybody. We've got room.
Yes, I would love it. Well, and talk to me about that. You end up attracting a big crowd. It's like a big potluck. I mean.
Yeah. So Friday night, we usually try to get a handle on how many people are coming because we like it to be a sit down around the table meal. And sometimes we keep it to just the family, especially if our son is home from the army and he likes it with just the family. But Shabbat lunch is we never know who's coming. I don't even write it down. I run into people and say, oh, do you have plans for Shabbat lunch? And it's a gazillion people, and we just put out a big buffet kind of thing so that we don't have to know how many people are coming. And it's really nice because it's like this salon every week with just people arguing and discussing and laughing. And it just feels like one of those places in the world where like really interesting people gather. And I feel so blessed to kind of hold that hub in our neighborhood or city.
I love that. And so I'm LDS or Mormon, and Sabbath's a big deal for us. I have a lot of people over the years who've been like, oh my gosh, that must be the worst. Like for us, you try not to like go and spend money or to stores or out and about. You really try to stick home, and everybody has their kind of different interpretation of that, right? And in my mind, there's no right or wrong for that. But the point for me is to make it a day apart. So like when my kids wake up, sometimes I'm pumping the Motab, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, just so that they're feeling some vibes.
I love that's called Motab.
Motab is the cooler way to do it.
Yeah.
We have big Sunday dinners. We get together with family. We go on neighborhood walks, I'm in Salt Lake. And so a lot of our neighborhood, not all, about half of it is Mormon as well. But we do some really inclusive things like neighborhood walkabouts where there's just desserts set up at different stations all over the neighborhood for everyone. So making it a day of gathering and a day apart. And when people are kind of blown away, like, oh man, it sounds so restrictive, I'm like, oh, it's so great to just have a day when you take everything off your to-do and you make your home a quiet place, whether it's naps or movies or dinner together. Well, it's not really quiet. We're like you, where when there's lots of people around, we're, laughing or talking politics and my kids roll their eyes when that's happening. Whether you're religious or not, having a day of rest or a day apart, even taking a tech Sabbath can be so big for your family where you just put all technology away for a day. And when I get done explaining that to people, they're like, oh, actually, that sounds really nice. And something that they almost crave to have that total break. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I look forward to Sundays. And in your case, you guys start Friday and you go to sundown on Saturday. Is that right?
So it's basically from just before sundown on Friday till you can see 3 stars in the sky Saturday. And then there's really my favorite thing, which is Havdalah. Havdalah is the ceremony that acknowledges the end of the Sabbath. And that I love most of all, I think because, for the other blessings, like the teenagers, like the boys mostly, will kind of like show up for the blessings but disappear. Like they're not so interested in hanging. If it's just the family, they'll hang out. But if there's a lot of people around, they'll like disappear at a certain point, where Havdalah kind of like brings everybody, and it's almost always just the family. And it's this beautiful ceremony that's got like fire and wine and spices. And at the end of it, we do this thing with the flame where we put it in heated up arak, which is this strong Israeli alcohol, or you put it in and it just bursts into this big flame. And we kind of like sing while the flame dies down. And that's probably my favorite part.
There's so many beautiful traditions in the Jewish faith. Honestly, that's, like I said, that was one of the things that I was so impressed by. Also, going to the Western Wall and watching that whole process, which brings me to the part where you get arrested, maybe on Shabbat.
I know. I feel like you're bringing up these things. You're like, oh, it's so beautiful how women are honored. And I'm like, no, it's not. Just like, I love the Western Wall. And I'm like, it's horrible.
Yeah, no. And that's why it's so interesting, because everybody's got their perceptions. And then I'm like, let's talk about getting arrested.
Right.
So talk to me about that. I think maybe you should have a cross stitch in your house that says families that get arrested together stay together.
Yeah, I think so.
So what happened?
I think so. It's funny, because people will sometimes say, what's that? We have this big bag underneath the stairs in our apartment, and it's our demonstration bag. It's got a megaphone. It's got signs.
So you are like ready to go.
Just in case there's a pop-up demonstration somewhere, something happens and everyone's got to get out and demonstrate, we could just grab the bag and go.
Yep. Some people have a 72-hour kit. You guys have your demonstration bag.
Exactly. It's like, the Jews in the old country who like always had a suitcase packed in case there was a pogrom and they had to run. Like, it's our version of it living in Israel.
Yeah, I know who to call when I'm ready to get
arrested with your kids.
Yeah, totally.
Well, the first time I took a minor to get arrested, it was my sister Sarah.
Oh my gosh.
I guess I must have been like in my early 20s and she was like 16 or 17, and we got arrested at Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant.
At Seabrook Power Plant?
Nuclear Power Plant.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this. Ever worry that all your kids are doing with their friends is showing each other videos on YouTube or Snapchatting each other whilst they are literally sitting right next to each other? Ever wish you could manage your kids' devices wherever they went? Well, Circle Go makes that possible. Circle Go takes all those settings on your kids' devices that they have at home and extends them to 4G LTE and any other Wi-Fi networks they join. Filters and time limits apply anywhere and everywhere, even for apps like Snapchat, Instagram, and YouTube. How, you ask? Find out more at meetcircle.com.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Did you chain yourself to anything? I mean, talk to me about that.
I don't remember if we chained ourselves. We just were there and refused to leave and got arrested with a bunch of people.
Amazing.
So the Western Wall, the Kotel, is a site in Jewish tradition that's sort of been the center. So when we were in the diaspora, after we had been scattered 2,000 years ago from what is now Israel, and before we came back, it was always the site where all of our prayers from all around the world went, because it was the temple. It was the place where people had prayed. It was both temples and come to for pilgrimages. And then in the destruction of the temples, and specifically the second temple, where we did go back for 2,000 years, it was the place where all Jews around the world prayed toward. So for me, I mean, rocks in and of themselves are not God, right? That would be idolatry. But their space is special because it is a place for thousands of years where Jews have prayed in that direction in a sense of longing, in a sense of purpose, in a sense of a future redemption. So it has all that kind of energy that's created around it. And, in part, I think because of that intensity, there's become a real battle there where in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox have a stranglehold over Jewish public places and also over life cycle events, right? So you can't be legally married in Israel if you're Jewish unless you did it through the ultra-Orthodox. You can't be legally divorced in Israel. You can't be legally converted to Judaism in Israel unless you did it through the ultra-Orthodox. And ultra-Orthodox Judaism is a very, very tiny sliver. And the very big problems I have with their control, really kind of fascistic control over those things in Israel is twofold. One, that it's not democratic, and the second, that it's not Jewish. Now, it's not democratic for obvious reasons, right? You can't have one tiny sliver of a religious interpretation be civil law in a democracy. It just doesn't jive. For example, my older son has been defending Israel on the Gaza border. He's in the army, and he wouldn't be considered Jewish by the ultra-Orthodox. He couldn't get married legally in Israel. Like the absurdity of that, the disgustingness of that. And the second thing is that, in my view, it's anti-Jewish. And I can say in my view because it's a democracy that we're in, right? And so we're allowed to have a plurality of views. And in my view, it's anti-Jewish. And why is it anti-Jewish? Because anytime you take a tiny sliver of a personal understanding of the world and you believe that that's the whole truth of everything, that's idolatry. It's the very definition of idolatry. They say they know God's will. They say they know God. Well, if you can hold God in your mind, that's mental idolatry. I mean, you can hold God in your hand, you can hold God in your mind. What's the difference between those two things? To not acknowledge the vastness of this universe and to have some humility around it is idolatry. And so it's anti-Jewish.
And I think that's where a lot of us are stuck, right? Just as a side note, I think so many of us think that our view is the thing, and we get stuck there and refuse to see the other points of view and everybody else where they're at.
Or the potential of it just being a teeny tiny drop in this eternal bucket that is God and God's world, right? The way I look at Judaism, and this is a way that's not honored by the Rabbi, and they have civil power, is that, Judaism for me is the way that I orient my life. It's how I understand my relationship with God. It's the values and the rituals and life cycle events in a Jewish form that orient me in the world. I don't feel like they're absolute truth. I feel like they're one path to God and a meaningful life shared by lots of people in the world so that we can have this joint potential to heal the world. So a Jewish relationship with God is a rite, a covenant to make the world a better place. Do I think it's the only covenant? Do I think it's the only way of being? No, that would be absurd. Just look at the sky. It's all too big. But if I want to make sense of my little life and my family and my community and the country that I live in, that's just the way that we used to orient ourselves. But the second that we say this is the be-all and end-all, we're in trouble, because anyone who's saying this is the be-all and end-all will fight to the death. And we see that around the world in different cultures right now.
And that puts some limitations on you, right? If you were going somewhere as simple as the Western Wall when it came to maybe a prayer shawl, or, I mean, you went in there and mixed things up a little bit.
Right. So I'm on the board of something called Women of the Wall. And Women of the Wall has been around for almost 30 years now. And I was around at the beginning, but just sort of peripherally involved. And then I was not involved for many years, and then got involved again about 4 or 5 years ago when my daughter Hillel, who's now 23, she was, maybe it was more than that. She was, I think, 17. She said, I want to go pray with Women of the Wall on Rosh Chodesh, the new month. And I was like, great, honey, good luck. And my husband said, sweetie, do you think maybe you want to go with her just in case? And so I was like, yeah, it's probably a good idea. So I went with her, and at that time, it's changed, but at that time you could get arrested if you were a woman wearing a prayer shawl. Now, again, here's an example of ultra-Orthodox religious interpretation becoming civil law. So my daughter and I were praying, and the police came and asked us to take off our prayer shawls, our talis, and we said no. We continued to pray. They came back and said, come with us, and started to kind of pull us out of the prayer area. And my daughter and I just sort of instinctively linked arms and sat down. And so they left. And I thought, awesome. We won this little battle. And then as we're walking out, we were arrested with 8 other women. And it was kind of funny because, we sat in the police station for a number of hours, and they asked us lots of questions and, looked at films and asked us what we did and sort of compared our account to the video. It was just it was so absurd. I mean, we were sitting there, they're spending time at the police station with women who were praying. At one point, I guess it was late enough that in LA, my sister was awake, and a friend of mine either texted her or tweeted to her something what was happening. And my sister tweeted about it, and it just took fire all over the world. And the next thing you knew, we were released. And the police are getting a gazillion calls from newspapers all over the world. I was getting a gazillion calls from newspapers all over the world. At one point, I got home and I was so worn out from everything that had happened that day, and all these journalists were calling. I just shut off my phone and took a nap because I was just completely shut down. And then the next month when I came back, I saw the police officer who had arrested me last time. And I was there again with my prayer shawl on. And I looked at him and I kind of put out my wrists like, you want to arrest me? And he just looked at me with this look of defeatedness and just shook his head no. I'm not going there again.
Well, and you didn't necessarily grow up in a really religious home, right? And so how did that happen for you? It sounds like you grew up maybe agnostic. How did you come to that place where you decided that, dude, I'm all in, sign me up?
So my parents would have what you call a mixed marriage. My father was atheist and my mother was agnostic. They're both Jewish. I actually, from a young age, sort of had this sense of God. And my dad would just sort of roll his eyes that's insane. We had no, really almost no religious practice. For Passover Seder, we'd sort of do something with our grandparents that was, kind of Passover light. And I didn't even know that you couldn't eat leavened goods for 8 days. I thought that it was just that one night. I knew very little. But the one thing that we did every year that was actually quite meaningful was on Rosh Hashanah, our dad used to take us out of school. And he would take my sisters and me up Mount Monadnock, this kind of small, doable, hikeable mountain for kids. And we would get to the top of the mountain. And it was, of course, beautiful in New Hampshire in the fall. And the leaves were starting to change. And kind of look around from the top of the mountain. My father would point down the mountain toward Manchester, where the 2 synagogues of the Manchester area were. And he would say, if there's a God, we're closer to him up here than those schmucks are down there in Temple. So that was sort of the extent of my religious upbringing. And then really when I got to college, I met this very cute activist Jewish boy who I eventually married. We were both involved in the anti-apartheid movement at BU. He was actually the head of it. He had sort of founded it. He wore a yarmulke, kippah, and I was like, oh, he's so Jewy. I was involved because I was like, racism is bad and we have to do something about it. And he was involved because he said everyone is made b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and that we have a brit, a covenant with God to make the world better. And I thought, wow, those are eternal concepts. Like, that's so much more powerful than my opinion, right? And I thought, I want to teach my kids those concepts. I want to like raise a family where they know those concepts and they can draw on those concepts to respond to anything in the world that needs to be responded to.
Yeah, and I love how you've said it's a partnership with God to make the world a better place. I mean, you can raise a family on that.
Yeah, I think so. And I love that, like that sort of chutzpah-ness of it. Like I feel like that's something that's special about Judaism, is the sense of being a partner with God,
Well, tell me this, when you were a kid then, so going back to your household, and this is a question I ask everybody, is what was the smell of your childhood? And I call it, what is the ratatouille of your childhood? Because it comes from this scene in a Disney movie, Ratatouille, where the rat, who is a chef, secretly makes this meal for a food critic. And the meal itself wins this really grouchy food critic over because it takes him back to his childhood because of the smell and the taste. And I think it's probably one of the most beautiful cartoon scenes I've ever seen in a movie. And as always, I will put a link in the show notes to the actual video clip because I think everybody should watch it. But if you're looking back to your childhood, what would you say the smell or the taste is that would take you straight there?
Our mom cooked a little bit, and she was good at what she made, but she was like a very basic, we'd often have scrambled eggs for dinner or like a rotisserie chicken that she bought at the local market ready made. And I love that about my mom. It's like she didn't want to spend time. She just wasn't interested in it. She didn't want to spend her time doing it. And so she didn't.
Yeah.
She just didn't. And it's funny, just a quick aside is that, my kids grew up on bright orange colored macaroni, right? Basically.
Yes.
And my grandmother used to always say to me, "Darling, what are you making for dinner tonight?" And I'd say, "Nana, I don't know. Whatever's in the cupboards and can be microwaved," basically.
Oh, I was like Kraft mac and cheese with cut up hot dogs in it.
Right, exactly. That kind of the vegetarian version of that we had.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and after a while, I said to my grandmother, "Nana, why do you always ask me?" Because I visited my Nana a lot. It's why do you always ask me what I'm making for dinner? And she confessed that she was afraid Yosef would leave me if I didn't cook.
And you got to pull this together.
Yeah. Anyway, so of my childhood, I would say the sound of the ripping of the plastic top over a TV dinner, and then that smell that comes out of those mashed potatoes with that little circle of butter in the middle.
Yes. And the really chewy yellow corn that comes in that.
Yes. Yes. And I loved them. I loved a TV dinner in the Brady Bunch was the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And we often had family dinners as well. And they were just sort of simple. I remember going to a friend's house and the mom had made franks and beans. And I was like, wow, that's really nice. Thanks. She looked at me like I was crazy, but I meant it.
Yeah, so Campbell's tomato soup is on my list. Yes. I wish I knew the brand, but there are some corn dogs that were frequently thrown in the oven. And now we are really pretty healthy eaters. I mean, we cook quite a bit. We've done crazy things like Whole30 and really focused on having really good food. And if I look back to my childhood, it's Quakers, s'mores, granola bars, Kraft mac and cheese and hot dogs.
Yes.
I should be perfectly preserved on the food that I ate.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
Hey guys, it's me again. Shameless plug for todaysmama.com. Because we have a podcast and because we can shamelessly plug all the things that we want. So if you're not catching up with us on the weekly, scientific studies show that you are 50% less satisfied with your life. Hashtag fake news? Question mark? I don't think so. This week, you can browse extra features from our guests like Susan's West African peanut soup recipe, We're also talking back to school and end of summer panic. If you're not feeling it, I'm feeling it for you. The short and sweet is that we've got you. We even curate the top headlines for parents from around the web. So head on over to todaysmama.com. Your life will be better. We promise. Winky face.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Yeah, and now in my family, I like to make healthy food, but like cooking for me now, I make food well, but only a few things, right? So
Yeah.
I go to the organic market every week. We have this one in our neighborhood that's there on Friday mornings that I just love going to and being at and bring the food home. And because a lot of my work is writing, when I'm like stuck and I just can't move forward, it's awesome to just sort of like go into my kitchen, open my computer, put on Rachel Maddow, and like for 45 minutes just kind of like cook up, grill the veggies and leave them on the counter. Because if they're on the counter, the kids will eat them. But it's like also just healthy for my head, like in between working and writing, to have that little break and kind of like just lose myself in like listening to the news and chopping vegetables.
Yeah. You know, we share a strategy in that I have the most wonderful piece of actual Tupperware that is like, and I say actual Tupperware because I like actually called a lady and ordered it from her because this I know, I felt like really old school. It's this big circle and it has all these containers or segments, so you can just, you know, put veggies or whatever you're going to put in there. And that's, I cut veggies every week. I put them in there, and the little very middle of it, you can put like hummus or a sauce or a dip or whatever. But just the fact of having it there, easy and accessible, I swear it takes our vegetable consumption up from like 0% to like 100%. So it is all in the availability of it.
Oh my God, I'm going on the Tupperware website after this.
Girl, I'll send you a link, and I got a lady that I can hook you up with. Her name's
All
Lindsay,
right.
and if you're lucky, she'll send you a keychain too.
All right. That's really funny.
Yeah, it's the best. Okay, so let's talk about adoption, because you knew from the time that you were young. See my segue there? We're talking like childhood. You knew since the time you were a kid that you wanted to adopt. At what point in your life did that hit you that it was time and you were ready? What was that process?
It's funny because when we were engaged, Yosef and I, we were living in DC, and I decided we'd adopt first. I just got it, like I wanted to adopt. I went to the Washington, DC. We went to like a meeting for like potential foster adopt and filled out the paperwork. But then like I got pregnant before I knew it, and I was like, okay, so we'll do it second. And then I had Hillel very quickly. I don't know. I think like we had to learn that like contraception is not like an amulet. Anyway, so but that was fine because I feel as like Orlando's probably better to have the bio kids first when I was like a little bit younger. So then after Hillel, and by the way, this paperwork that I got in DC, it never left my pocketbook. I always had it. It was like an identity card. Always, and sometimes I'd pull it out and I would look at it, and I knew we weren't adopting through DC anymore. We had already had this one, but I just kind of had it as this promise, as this like reminder that it was still out there. And so then when Elise and Hillel were like 5 and 3, I was like, that's it. We're doing it now. We wanted to adopt from Ethiopia for a bunch of reasons. Mainly, we're already really connected to Ethiopia through the Ethiopian Jewry movement that my husband is very much involved in. And because of that, we have this like Ethiopian Jewish art in our house. We just felt this draw. And even though like our boys aren't from that community, we felt this draw to Ethiopia. And we went through, I said, this is it. It's time now. And he's like, okay, he's game. So we got Adar. Actually, there's a video if you want to link to it. You're welcome to, of my meeting Adar. So, and so then after that, we had another bio kid, Ashira, and then after that, we adopted Samir, when we adopted him, he was 4 years old, also from Ethiopia.
How did you get matched? Like, was there a moment when you were like, yep, you're mine, and I know it? Or what was that process?
Yeah, it's a different process for every country, and even sometimes within countries, every orphanage. So with Adar, like my husband, Yosef, is very kind of like woo-woo. He like senses stuff in the universe. His whole like mother's side of the family is like that. They just like, they feel the vibes and the beyond. And he said, we're going to be matched with our child on Purim, and it's going to be a boy. So I said, okay, fine. And so at that point, it was like a number of months before Purim, and we still had a lot of paperwork to do. So it was sort of this holiday Purim kind of worked out time-wise anyway. And with his sense of it, we thought, okay, great. So Purim will look for the match. And Purim is a holiday of like secrets becoming revealed. And it's a holiday where the heroine is adopted herself. And so it's kind of a cool connection. So Purim comes around, and we go to this Purim party at our synagogue with our girls who we have a picture of that day, and they're dressed super as like creepy Purim clowns. I don't know what we were thinking, but we come back, we get the girls to bed, and we call California where our agency was. And this agency also runs the orphanage. So they're, one and the same. So I said to Yosef, you do it, I can't. So I hear him say, hi, how are you? It's Yosef. Wondering if any kids were brought in today. And he says, no, are you sure? Nobody? Really? And he's kind of like, no kid was brought in. He said, are you really sure? And I was like, honey, leave her alone. Of course she's sure. And then he says, wait, what? And it turns out a little boy who'd been brought in that day, but she wasn't supposed to tell anybody because he wasn't processed yet. So he wasn't like officially in the system. And he said, that's our kid. And she said, don't you want to wait, get the medical reports and this, that? And he goes, nope, that's our kid. Sign us up. And she said, okay. And that's Adar. That's our whole heart, Adar. And then with Zamir, it was a different story. So with Zamir, the orphanage sent us 2 DVDs, just packed with like short interviews with kids. And they said, choose one. So I was like, oh God. So 2 of my best friends came over, and we just watched these videos. And we basically just identified boys between Adar and Ashir's ages, right? Just totally objective criteria. And there were 7 of those in the end. Yosef comes home that night and he says, just show me those 7 kids. Like, we kind of flipped from kid to kid, and we get to Zamir. And it's this little boy, 3-4 years old. He's got like a bandage on his forehead. And the narrator, who's the director of the orphanage, says, so this is Kadir Ismail. He's, 3.5 years old. And you can see he's got a bandage on his head because he got a little scrape with one of the little kids this morning. And Yosef says, that's our kid. He can hold his own in our family. And that was him. And that was Zamir.
Oh, that's so perfect.
Yeah.
I worked at an adoption agency when I was in college, and I loved seeing the way people came together, the way their circumstances, the way everything worked out, because every time it felt so destined to be to me. The stories are so beautiful and interesting and crazy, and the odds of certain things coming together just seem impossible, like your husband calling, that day, and your son coming in that day, Now, you also wrote a book, Casting Lots. Tell me about that book.
Casting Lots sort of emerged from just notes, things I just started writing when Dar first came home. Or before he came home, actually. I just started writing about God and Judaism and this process of leading to a human who I would love to the ends of the earth, but I had no idea who it was, who maybe existed in the world already. I just started writing about that. And it's interesting because, at that point I was already a rabbi. I was a mom of these 2 girls who went to Jewish day school, and their whole worldview was so Jewish, and our family was the Jewish rhythms, and Judaism was still kind of something I accessed. It wasn't something I felt in my gut. And really through starting to write about adoption, and certainly when I met him and when he came home, and Judaism started to become really in my gut. Like I was in this world, this constellation of metaphors and values and paradigms and rituals that really oriented me in the world in a meaningful way, as opposed to being tools that I took off the shelf to use and put back. And so that was what the book was about meeting Adar, raising him, and Judaism sort of seeping into my pores in a new way.
From the family you grew up in to, stepmoms and dads to adoption, it feels like you've done an amazing job throughout your life of blending family. What tips would you have for those who maybe specifically adopt internationally? What has made the difference for your kids?
I don't know. I mean, listen, for us, it's still, who knows how everybody's going to turn out. So far, basically so good.
Yeah, we got to cross our fingers, right? Like things seem good right now.
Everything seems fine at the moment. We'll have to see. I don't know. But I mean, I can share you what I've done and what I still think would continue to do, which is basically go with your gut. I feel like, yes, get help. There are things that I've learned now being in the business that I didn't know that I absolutely would have done and would have done differently, especially with Zamir. But I think I'll go with your gut. Like, people often will adopt and say, like, I have to raise my kid as their birth culture and as, in this case, like Jewish. I think you don't. Like, if that's your gut, if that's what you feel like is like right for your family, do it. That's fine. It's not a bad thing. It's good. But for us, I felt like they're Jewish and we're going to raise them Jewish. And if they're interested in Ethiopia or anything else, we're all for it. That's great. We've gone back and we visited. But I feel like don't get the criticism of other families, or specifically other adoptive families, who say, oh, if you've got a daughter from China, she has to learn Mandarin. Like, she has to, she doesn't have to learn Mandarin. She can learn Hebrew. That's okay. I have one good friend who's raised this phenomenal daughter, and she's this religious Jew, and she was born in China. It's like her soul was just Jewish. It just is. And if she had been forcing her to learn Mandarin instead of Hebrew, it just wouldn't have fit. It would have felt like putting, the round peg in the square hole for this child. Like, know your kid, know yourselves, and be true to that. With, of course, finding out like smart things from people who make it their business to learn about adoption and healthy kids who are adopted. Of course, take in all the information you can, but don't feel like, in terms of those life choices, that the people who are pressuring you to do X, Y, or Z are right. Trust your gut.
And what advice would you have for people who might want to foster but maybe haven't done it yet? It sounds like, did your family foster when you were growing up? It sounds like maybe your dad did.
My parents did. That's part of like why I knew from childhood that I wanted to adopt, because I saw up close these kids who didn't have a permanent family of their own. And it's a terrible thing. It's a really, really terrible thing. Kids in foster care have twice the rate of PTSD as war veterans. Can you imagine? So someone who wants to foster, first of all, if you want to get in touch with me and you're interested in creating a cohort of people, this is what we do at Second Nurturers. We create cohorts of people from within the same existing community. So, for example, a synagogue, but it could also be a church. It could be an LGBTQ center. It could be any kind of community. And you say, wow, I'm really interested in fostering and adopting, and I'll bet we could find other people in my community who also are. Contact me, and we will present to your community this idea of Second Nurture, which is a community of people, a cohort within a community, who all go through the process, either to foster or to adopt or to mentor or to be emergency shelter. That way people can support each other in that process, talk things through together, see what fits in your community. And of course, each family adopts or fosters their own child, but you have other people who are doing that within your community and who speak the same cultural language you do. So you have that extra level of depth and importance stuff that you can draw from. And then the community as a whole learns different ways that they can be supportive. One community we're working with, there's an adoption psychologist who's a member of the community, and she's volunteering. Communities will have educators who can say, oh, listen, I'm a retired educator. I can coordinate all the IEPs, so the individual education plans, for all the kids who are fostering in our community. Or whatever it is. Like, people can, one community, we just, it was a single mom without a lot of money, and we got everything the 11-year-old kid needed, right? Just practical. Or another family who live in a little tiny house in Los Angeles, who, when they brought their child home from foster care, they lost their home office, right? Because it became the kids' room. Within a day, the community had provided a gorgeous home office bike ride away from them. They had a bunch to choose from. That's what they chose. And they now have an office for free, right? Because the community rose the occasion. So it could be like in terms of the professional things that the community has the skills in, or it could be in terms of just very practical. We have a storehouse that has cribs and all kinds of stuff in it now, in the synagogue that we work with. Also, what we do is we make partnerships with the local social service agency. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to become the home study agency. We don't want to become the support services for adoptive families. We vet those and we find the best partners, not just in terms of the skills of those partners, but in terms of like the fit for that community. And we found amazing people who come to us because we have enough people that it makes it worth their while to come and serve us in our community. So we do that. We pull it all together with that special sauce of integrating adoption into the culture of that community so that people who are adoptive families and kids who are adopted see themselves in what it means to be Jewish, or they see themselves in what it means to be, whatever the culture is of that place.
Well, and it's so brilliant because you don't have to do it alone, right? But then also by making it almost the cause or the sub-focus of your community, you're building in just this extended support system that already has all the same context as you. I think that is a brilliant way to solve all the world's problems. You've cracked the code. I love that approach. And I think a lot of people are scared to foster. I think you hear kind of horror stories out there, or maybe there's things emotionally you're afraid of getting attached, or, I just think it's probably something we need to talk about more, but that needs to be happening more in that way where we're seeing each other and supporting each other through it.
Right. Because even the cases where if a family wants to adopt a kid and doesn't get to him, there's that loss. We take that risk for the sake of the child, right? And that when we experience that loss, better we have a community around us. Or if it's super hard and the kid can stay with you, but the kid's a huge challenge. Or one mom who said, I've got a teenage child who's not for this, but I'm going to go forward and do it. How do we help him to evolve? And so the community's responding to that as well.
I love that. If people are looking to find you online, where should they go?
Great. So they can go to the number 2, Nurture, TNURTURE, 2nurture.org, or they could go to rabbisusansilverman.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Rabbi Susan, RABBASUSAN.
Perfect. And I will be booking my flight soon to come back to Israel so I can come have Shabbat at your house.
Our house is your house.
Okay. I'll meet you there. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thanks for listening. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast at todaysmama.com/podcast. You'll get an email alert every week when a new episode goes live. Bonus, because we like to sweeten the deal. If you subscribe via newsletter, you will also be automatically entered to win any and all contests we ever host. Some are big. I'm talking big, like vacations and cash prizes and things of that nature. Some are little, but it's all worth it. So visit todaysmama.com/podcast for more. And remember, wherever you're listening from, please subscribe, like, rate, review, do all the things. We'll love you forever, and we'll catch you next time.
You've been listening to the Today's Mama podcast with Rachel Hersher. To find out more, go to todaysmama.com. That's todaysmama.com. Today's Mama, connecting moms and families with the best of today.